Good evening, and I'm back for my bi-weekly Principles of Good Health lives. I will be back on the other week to do my nutrition in the news, but tonight I'm on a particular topic, very topical for April, because it's IBS Awareness Month in April. And I'm not specifically talking about IBS, but I'm sure there are many of you who often wonder about your symptoms, any digestive, any gut type symptoms that you might have. And maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you wonder whether it's something you need to be taking care of. Maybe you think it's just normal. Maybe you think you developed a sensitivity to a food because of a particular symptom that you've got. So I thought I'd have a bit of a refresh and a recap around the typical digestive symptoms and what this might mean as to what's going on in the body, and why it's so important to listen to your body and to take action now before things can get out of hand. So as I said, it is IBS Awareness Month, and I'm not specifically going into the in-depth details about IBS because it really is a catch-all term. I often find people ring me up saying, I think I've got IBS or I've got IBS without it being properly diagnosed. But in terms of diagnosis, I do find that a lot of people are often told that probably it's IBS because, well, what else do you call this magnitude of different types of symptoms that might be going on? But I'd just like to ask you if you experience any of the following symptoms, even in a mild form, even if it's just one of these. Do you ever find that you get a little bit bloated? Do you ever find that you're burping after you're eating meals? Do you get a little bit of a feeling of indigestion or heartburn? Even possibly a little bit of acid reflux. It could be quite mild. You might have some wind, you might have cramping, maybe there's a little bit of diarrhea or loose stools or occasional constipation. You might miss a day, there might be a little bit of straining going on. And these symptoms might come and go. They might be appearing more frequently. There may just be one of these symptoms. Maybe occasionally it might seem to get worse and then it just disappears again and it wanes and it goes away until it comes back another time. And these niggling symptoms, you might think, well, is there something I need to worry about? Should I just ignore it? Because it's not really affecting my day-to-day life. I can still go to work. I can still go and do my hobbies and my sport. I can even still go out and socialize. I can still go out and eat a meal. And maybe you're beginning to think about what you should pick off the menu or eat something slightly differently, but it isn't really impacting your life too much. But should you take notice of what's going on and should you take action? Well, my view is that absolutely yes, you should observe it. You should be concerned, you should take notice, you should be concerned. It's so much as to want to do something about it, because these things might be normal because you know so many other people that experience this. You might think it's a normal part of the aging process, but it doesn't need to be that way. And at the end of the day, it isn't normal because the body is designed to be digesting food, and we shouldn't be experiencing the symptoms that we do today. So what could be out of balance? Well, I like to think of the digestive system as a series of zones. So we've got the mouth, we've got the stomach that's quite high up, we've got the small intestines that if you were to spread it out on a bit of paper would go on for a very, very long way. You've got the large intestines. So you've got these four areas of the what I call the gastrointestinal tract, these four main areas, these four zones of the gut. And three of those are predominantly to do with digestion. Yes, digestion starts first and foremost right up here. In fact, I could say it starts from this point onwards. It's the sight and the smell of the food. Now, it all has a knock-on effect when we don't start to pay attention to each zone in turn and what is going on. So the stomach is up high up under the rib cage, and this is predominantly one of the major areas where things can start to go wrong. And this is the area where you might experience a little bit of acid reflux, this heartburn, feeling of indigestion, like things just haven't been broken down. You might feel full really quickly. You may feel like you're burping after eating. This is all linked to this stomach zone, the second zone that I talked about. But first of all, we need to think about where digestion starts. So we've got this stomach zone high up under the rib cage where we get those symptoms. And what can happen is if we lack sufficient digestive secretions like stomach acid in the stomach, this has a knock-on effect in the next area of digestion, which is in the small intestines, because the contents leaving the stomach need to be highly acidic. And if it isn't highly acidic, the trigger to release more digestive secretions, you'll have heard of your gallbladder, that releases bile. The bile starts to break down fats. And we get a lot of different digestive enzymes that come from the pancreas that are really involved altogether in breaking down carbohydrates, proteins, and fats further. They all need this acidity trigger. And so if stomach acid levels are a little bit low, we're not necessarily going to get that trigger. And what can happen then is if food isn't properly broken down, because we haven't got enough stomach acid to break down food in the stomach, and we don't have enough bile coming from the gallbladder and enough enzymes coming from the pancreas to fully break down all our food, what we're left with is some food that's partially broken down. So you'll be getting some nutritional goodness coming from that, of course. Otherwise, how are you going to survive? You're not getting any nutritional goodness, but you've got this partially broken down food. And what happens is that instead of just waste and fiber passing through the small intestines and onto the colon, we end up with partially broken down food. Now, the colon, this is the home of our microbiome. This is the area that we are full of different bacteria and yeasts and viruses and archaea. These are all different types of microbes that live synergistically in our large intestine. Well, they should live synergistically, but they can unfortunately get out of balance. And unfortunately, if we find out that we get some food that passes down into the colon, well, some of those other pathogenic strains of bacteria and these other types of viruses and yeast, they can start to feed off this food that shouldn't be there, and that can create dysbiosis, and in turn that can create wind and bloating. It can create a very unfavorable environment down in the large intestines in our colon, and that in turn can also lead to constipation. It can lead to diarrhea, it can lead to urgency. So all these things that we don't want to happen. But first and foremost, we've got to think about these three areas of digestion and what action we can take now to stop things getting worse. I've just dropped my notes, I'll just pick those up. So what action can we take? It goes back to the really simple thing about mindful eating. I said that digestion starts up here, and it does. It starts in the mouth when we chew food. Actually, we need to take it one step before, because when we see food and we smell food, if you think about something that smells wonderful when you're really hungry, you get an increase of saliva in your mouth. There's a message that goes to the brain from the sight and smell of food that is telling the mouth, first and foremost, that food is coming. It's also telling the stomach to release digestive secretions. So we need to take a moment, we need to pause, we need to take a bit of time thinking about the food that's coming. We need to enjoy that sight and smell of the food. Just allow a little bit of time, just pause slightly before we delve into what we're going to eat, because we're going to get some secretions, this saliva in the mouth that's increased. And saliva actually contains a digestive enzyme, something called amylase. Amylase is one of our carbohydrate enzymes that starts to break down our carbohydrate food, like our plant food. And as I said, in turn, there's a greater release of stomach acid, also known as hydrochloric acid, and this gastric juice that we need to start to break down food in our stomach. So food very, very quickly, in nanoseconds really, passes from the mouth, the throat, and down the esophagus into our stomach that's really high up under our rib cage. And so there's a very quick action that occurs just from that sight and smell of food, and through the chewing action and the release of more saliva is encouraging more digestive secretions, this stomach acid to be released into the stomach. So if you think about eating really, really quickly, if you don't spend time to stop and pause and think about what you're eating, you're bypassing that. And food arrives in your stomach and your stomach is in a bit of a shock mode, really. And whilst there will be some acid there, there's probably not going to be nearly enough secreted into the stomach to help that digestive process that's so fundamentally important in the stomach area. There's a little bit of digestion in the mouth, but the main part of digestion starts in the stomach. Mostly with protein food, we start to cleave apart protein molecules like from meat, fish, eggs, pulses, lentils, tofu, dairy, all of this food, they're protein-rich foods. This is what starts to be pulled apart through the acid and with another enzyme that's activated with the action of the acid in the stomach. And the whole meal is churned up in the stomach and it will sit there for 2 to 3 hours. So if we don't have enough stomach acid, we can start to get these symptoms of burping through food fermentation, this feeling of fullness quickly and indigestion. Now, to explain about acid reflux, why on earth am I saying to you that you can get acid reflux if we don't have enough acid? And it's because what happens is when there's enough acid in the stomach, it sends the contents of the stomach southwards. It's sending it in the direction of the small intestines to be released in that area when the digestion has taken place. If there's insufficient acid, the contents of the stomach can rise upwards. It can put pressure in the upper part of the stomach onto a valve known as the lower esophageal sphincter, the LES, and it can just allow a tiny bit of acid to escape back into the esophagus. This tube that runs from the throat to the stomach is not designed to have an acid. It's come from a very alkaline environment. The acid should be contained in the stomach. And if the contents are rising up and there's only a tiny amount of acid, not enough, tiny amount can escape back. So acid reflux, in my experience, very often, in most cases in my experience, has got nothing to do with excess acid. Sometimes it can be, but more often than not, it's to do with low acidity. So we need to be really paying attention to eating mindfully, sitting at a table. Don't have gadgets, don't watch TV, concentrate on the meal and think about whether you are stressed when you sit down to eat, because stress will automatically hinder digestive secretions. We are not designed as humans to be digesting food when we're feeling stressed. We're designed to be digesting food when we're in the relaxation phase, the parasympathetic phase known as rest and digest. Deliberately called rest and digest because that's when we should digest food. We're not meant to digest food when we're feeling fight or flight stress mode. It inhibits our digestive secretions, especially into the stomach. So you can't take away all the stress in your life. I'm realistic enough to understand that. But whatever you can do when you sit down to eat, it's trying to remove yourself from your stresses as much as possible and taking a few moments to pause, do some deep breathing, maybe thinking about going for a short walk before you sit down to eat, if that is going to help you get into more of a relaxed frame of mind. So important. Each one of these little things is fundamentally important when we want to think about the digestion of food. And if you want to overcome some of these little niggles before they can develop into something more substantial. Now, have you reviewed your diet lately? It's a really, really good idea to keep a food diary for a few days and write down everything that you're eating, each meal, and including your drinks as well. What exactly are you consuming? How many foods will fall into the category of being processed, even if they're only lightly processed? Pasta has been processed to a degree. Packet of crisps has gone through a processed method, hasn't it? You know, when we think about foods in their natural forms, we're thinking about meat, fish, eggs, vegetables, fruit. Those are our natural foods. You know, we need to be eating more of those in their natural form rather than something that's been tinkered with at all. So I'm sure most of you are not eating what I call highly processed foods, but it might be worth going away and thinking, are you reducing and avoiding more processed foods, even if they're only slightly processed, as much as you can in your diet? And have a look at how much how often in your diet and in each meal, the quantity of grains there may be, particularly the white grains from refined grains and the wheat-based grains. You know, if you're eating bread, toast, pasta, pies, biscuits, pizza, you know, this is all white wheat. Might be whole grain, but it's still wheat. It's a challenge on the digestive system. Now, I'm not a believer that we have to eliminate all these foods entirely from our diet. I think most of us can tolerate some of these foods, but it depends on the frequency that they're appearing in your diet. And maybe you need to go and have a little look at whether you can reduce them down. Perhaps you can have some days when you don't have them at all. Perhaps you can reduce it down so it only appears in your diet in one meal of the day, if at all. So have a look at alternatives for that. The same goes for dairy. We are the only mammals to consume dairy beyond infancy. We do lack the digestive secretions to break down the milk sugar known as lactose. We lack that beyond infancy. We are the only mammals to continue to consume dairy. So look again at your diet. How much cheese, yogurt, even Greek yogurt that you may think is good for you. Look at the amount of milk in your diet and ice cream and yogurts and cheese. And the same thing with the wheat. Can you reduce it down? Can you take it out of your diet for a few days? Just keep a food diary, maybe keep a food reaction chart to see if you notice an improvement to your symptoms. And finally, thinking about the abundance of vegetables in your diet. We don't tend to eat nearly enough. But at the outset, what you do need to do, before I say any more on this subject, is to go slow. Whatever I'm about to say, I don't want you to go rushing off and start to be piling in vegetables into your diet, because your poor digestive system will struggle to start with. You need to go slowly with increasing. Now, of course, we'll have heard about 5 a day, and that may seem like a really good thing to aim for. So great if you're consuming 5 portions of fruit and vegetable a day. So well done for doing that. Realistically, though, that is a government guideline to try and get us towards eating a more modest amount of fruit and vegetables and to get more fibre into our diet. We know we need fibre in our diet for a healthy gut. We know that people who suffer with bowel cancer are more likely to have very, very low intakes of fibre in their diet. There can be other reasons as well. So for a very healthy gut and for good transit times through the gut and for healthy bowel movements and helping to keep stools soft but formed and helping to cleanse the walls of the colon, getting rid of all that toxic waste matter, we need fibre. We need soluble fibre and we need insoluble fibre. And we will get both of those from our vegetables and from our fruit. But we need to focus more on the vegetables and the fruit because of the sugar content in the fruit. And we really need to be pushing and trying to aim upwards towards more of a 10 a day. That may seem like a big ask at this stage, but you can be including your nuts and seeds, and we can be including spices and herbs in that as well. But thinking about vegetables, we want to get towards 10 a day across breakfast, lunch and dinner. We need more variety. We need to get away from eating the same old foods. Ideally, we'd eat 40 different plant foods a week in order to really maximize and get that gut as healthy as it can be. The other thing about the vegetable intake and fruit as well is to do with the prebiotic element. What prebiotics mean is it's the food that feeds the gut bacteria. They're known as prebiotics. They're the fuel that feed gut bacteria, and some of those gut bacteria in turn then go on to provide substance and compounds that feed other gut bacteria because they all work synergistically together. And they help to keep the gut lining healthy, etc., etc. And that's where a lot of these microbes, friendly ones, thrive and survive. So we need to be trying to put a little bit more fruit and vegetable in our diet. With the fruits, we need to be watching the sweet varieties. We need to be eating more of the dark berries. They're very, very good with prebiotic benefits and they're low sugar. We can be eating kiwi fruits. Stewed apple is brilliant for the gut, and it's a low sugar fruit. So apples and pears, kiwi fruit, pomegranate and berries are brilliant fruits to be eating. But very, very slowly increase those. So these are the foundations to help keep your gut healthy. And don't ignore those little niggles that I spoke about at the start. The little niggles can slowly over time start to develop in more than one niggle. You may start to get 2, 3, 4 different symptoms beginning to appear because of the knock-on effect throughout the whole digestive tract that I've just mentioned. So think about your mindful eating. Think about ways to reduce the stress at the point of time that you're about to eat your meals. Think about increasing your vegetable abundance and diversity. Think about reducing the reliance on the wheats and the glutens and the dairy in your diet, and obviously with processed foods. And these are the very basic things that we can do to try and keep our gut in tip-top condition, helping to avoid digestive symptoms that may be beginning to appear. And if we nip them in the bud now, we've got a very good chance of worse things not appearing later on. So I hope you found that useful. Next Tuesday, I'll be back with my nutrition in the news, with what's going on in my world, what's going on in the media, and I'll be talking about that. And in 2 weeks' time, I'll be back with another one of my principles of good health topics to talk to you live here tonight. Thanks so much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. Remember, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Peyton Principles Natural Health, so you can keep abreast of all the lives that I'm putting out and the videos that I'm putting out on a weekly basis. Have a great week, everyone. Take care. Bye.